Dr. Jenny Susser has been engaged in the art and science of human performance her entire life, beginning with her own athletic journey. A 4-year All American swimmer, she served as an assistant coach at UCLA, swam on 2 national teams, and competed at the 1988 Olympic trials. She's a clinical psychologist specializing in sport and corporate high performance and the director of wellbeing and performance at the University of Florida's MBA program. She works with people who want to do better and feel better while doing it. She focuses on personal energy as the foundation for not only performance, but health and well being. Jenny and I shared a stage in Gainesville not too long ago, the TEDx stage, and I was so impressed with her message that I said, I've got to get her on the show. So, Jenny, welcome.
Mike, thank you. Thanks for having me. And listen, ditto on so impressed with your TEDx talk. I thought it was beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd love to talk about me for the next 40 minutes, but we won't do that. Maybe
So would I.
we'll do another one. We'll just talk about me. But tell us a little bit more about kind of your journey from all-state swimmer and Olympic trials and all that to studying high performance and energy.
Well, gosh. So I started swimming when I was really young. It was kind of discovered at 5.5 and swam for a short period of time and then didn't swim for 10 years. So I swam from like 5.5 to 7.5 and didn't swim again until I was 17. So I started swimming seriously right at the 1984 Olympics. So when I swam when I was little, my relay team had an age group national record. I think it was 8 and under for the medley relay. And when we got back from the big meet, our coach gave us all these t-shirts that said, "Look for me in the Olympics in 1984." And, I was 7, I was 6, like I was a kid at the time. It didn't really mean anything to me at that age. And then I quit swimming for that's a whole other podcast. And didn't swim for 10 years, but then I was living in Southern California. I was going to high school in Irvine. And the 1984 Olympics, as you know or may remember, were in Los Angeles. And so they were kind of in my backyard. And having them right there stirred up all this stuff and desire and all those dreams from being a kid. And so got back into swimming. And I ended up doing really well my senior year in high school. And then I walked on at UCLA and wound up All American all 4 years. And I know, like, I make it sound like I had nothing to do with it. I worked really hard and I had great coaches. My high school club coach was fantastic. My coaches at UCLA were amazing. My experience was incredible. I worked really hard. I had amazing, incredible support from my family. And, so what do they say? You work hard and you get lucky and there's your fortune. So, but not swimming for that 10-year period, I didn't have all that experience and all of those successful events that build that confidence in a competitive athlete. And so I call myself a head case. I was a bit of a head case when I was an athlete at UCLA. I'm still friends with my former head coach, Cindy Gallagher, who retired a couple of years ago. And still to this day, when I talk to her, sometimes I'm like, I'm so sorry. I must have been horrible to coach. And she's like, no, you just didn't have enough time. You didn't have as many years as all those people who had been swimming all their lives. And so when I finished swimming and felt like I really could have done a lot better, we started working with a sports psychologist when I was at UCLA. I knew I didn't want to coach. And then when I saw Dr. Bill Pluram like spinning his magic, I was like, okay, I can do that. So I went back and got a PhD in clinical psychology, clinical health psychology, became licensed as a psychologist in New York State and started working with athletes. And then about 10 years into it, I met Dr. Jim Lair from the Human Performance Institute and went to work for him so that I could be mentored by him. And that's how I got into corporate high performance. And he is also the person, him and his program is what introduced me into the concept of energy and the power of energy management. So that's kind of
Beautiful.
the flip.
Beautiful. And energy is the reason why I thought your message was so important is that the folks that listen to the show, the clients I work with are the CEOs and the leaders of the company. It's the leadership team. And they're just, it's a roller coaster ride. And if you're not finding a way to manage your energy, and that's why I want to learn your secrets for me and my clients. If you're not finding a way to manage your energy, you just have no shot. You've got no shot at getting things done. You've got no shot of lasting and having that passion. So important. And I heard you say, I've got this kind of written down. I want to read this. You say most of the high performers you work with don't understand energy for performance and are missing some of the most critical elements for high performance. So I want to break that down. 'Cause you say two things there. One is, they're missing some critical elements is a lack of understanding and they're missing elements. So the first thing is when you think of leaders, what is it that they don't understand about energy that they need to?
My whole thing around energy is that it's really not about resilience. It's much more about replenishment. And what we think, so the human body is like stupid resilient. We are resilient to fall. We can take it and take it and take it, and then keep getting up and taking it again. And while that's an amazing trait, it's also, you know, a curse of a trait. So we tend to spend and spend and spend and spend our energy. And we really don't think about that we need to be replenishing what we spend ongoingly, like as a system. We kind of wait until we crash and burn, right? So we get sick, we become injured, something happens, takes us out of the game. We become burned out. Burnout is when you've been resilient for far too long and you went from having a tank to an empty tank to a reserve tank to emptying your reserve tank. And that, my friend, is burnout. And when you've got nothing left, you've got nothing left. And so we all have that tipping point. And what our corporate culture really embraces is this path to burnout, quite honestly. So we're all kind of going, 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 going. I'll drink some coffee. I'll drink something else. I'll eat all the cheats, the physical cheats to keep you upright and showing up every day. But the cost, mentally, emotionally, and performance wise, it's a slow burn. And you can have moments of high performance that are built on adrenaline or cortisol, but you keep doing it and eventually you will tip. You'll hit your tipping point and you will crash. And I think that's what people don't understand. We have this culture of, sleep when you're dead. I know that's changing for sure over the last decade with all of the research on sleep. And, I remember starting to read about sleep a decade ago and saying this will be the metric in 10 years. And it is. But we really don't embrace taking breaks and creating a foundation and a culture of wellness, well-being, health, energy recovery, such that we're always performing at a high level instead of saving it for those critical key moments.
So I've always used that word resilience as most people have as a good thing,
Yeah.
but you're saying,
Yeah.
no, that's a bad word, resilience. It's hurting us.
So as a psychologist, what the corporate world does is it grabs all these psychological concepts and it twists them into something that is monetizable, right? I can sell this resilience. I can sell a program on resilience, right? Just like stress, mindset, and grit, right? We hear all these words and then we take them as a one off and we think this is the thing, right? If I'm resilient, then I got it. Then I can handle this. But resilience, it was really funny. My last project that I did at Human Performance Institute was to write a program called Resilience. And I remember working on it, and Jim gave me an outline and said, here, fill in the blanks. And I took it off of his model and I'm doing it and I'm putting it together. And I remember I walk up to my boss and who was not Jim at the time, and I walk up to him and I hand him the course and I go, "This is not going to work." And he's like, "What are you talking about? This is great. Resilience is great. This is the thing. This is what everybody needs. This is going to help people at their performance, find their ideal performance state, all that." And I said, I kept thinking like there's something missing. So then I started to dig into the science, our autonomic nervous system and our stress, like what our sympathetic nervous system does and how much it costs us energetically, and our parasympathetic nervous system. And started to learn that our parasympathetic nervous system, which is driven by the vagus nerve, a lot of people have heard these concepts by now, but most people spend way too much time in sympathetic and not nearly enough time in parasympathetic. So their teeter-totter is imbalanced.
And
So it
and in
spends
fact, for those that don't know, because I always get mixed up between the 2, tell us the
yeah,
difference between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic.
okay. So our sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight. So everybody relates to that: fight, flight, freeze, faint, and reproduce, the other F. So that's our sympathetic nervous system. That's the one that we relate to as fight or flight. Our parasympathetic nervous system is the balancing arm, and that is rest, digest, recover, replenish. So when
Got
we
it.
begin to calm down, that's a function of our parasympathetic nervous system. Working with athletes for 25 years, I've discovered that even at the highest levels, people are very weak at their ability to calm themselves. We're so good at stressing ourselves out and getting amped up and spending energy, but we're not very good at that piece where, can you calm yourself down? Can you find your baseline, your sweet spot for energy expenditure and recovery that keeps you in a performance state? And so when I looked further into the resilience literature, what I found was that, of course, it's a psychological concept. And really, what it was originally was a set of traits that some researchers identified that existed in survivors of childhood trauma that survived successfully. And so they looked at the personality, character, mechanical traits that these adults who had childhood trauma contained, and then they compared them to the ones who weren't successful as adults who had childhood trauma. And they thought, well, can we teach them this set of traits and make them higher functioning and have a better quality of life? And yes, we can. And so that's where it came from. Resilience was not meant to be this pop psychology, resilience yourself out of bed every day to get your butt to work. Like that's not really what it's for. Yeah, it's for the big stuff. Resilience is for when you have trauma, for when you have emergencies, when you have grief events, when, big stuff, big stuff. It shouldn't be for, and I say this in my TED talk, it shouldn't be for answering your emails. Like you shouldn't need resilience, the kind of energy that you need to be resilient to open up your computer or to walk in the door or to have a conversation with your boss or your direct reports or your team or whatever it is. So the thing that we need, if you think about resilience as being kind of a special space, the thing that we really need is we need good energy. We need to have enough energy so that all of our systems are a go. When we're in that sympathetic nervous system, it has a high consumption rate of energy. It burns a lot of energy. It's like running your car if you have a like a fuel-based car at the red line.
So I wanna get into how we do that. If it's not about
Yeah.
resilience, what is it
Yeah.
about? What do we need to do to manage that energy? But there's one thing I wanna hit first, then we're gonna come back to that. How do you know you've got an energy problem, right? For the folks listening, well, I don't have an energy problem. I don't feel tired right now. Like, what
Right.
are the signs of, oh crap, I've got an energy issue?
That is a brilliant, brilliant question. And the reason why people don't know they have an energy problem is mostly because they have had an energy problem for so long that now that feels like their baseline, right? I'm not tired, but you sit down on the couch or you go to bed at night and you're out. You go on vacation and instead of going sightseeing, you pass out under an umbrella on the beach. People ask you if you want to do things socially, and you're like, no, I'm way too exhausted. And you're not an introvert. It takes you twice as long to generate something that requires creativity than it used to take. And that's not a function that creativity, time for creativity does not decrease over age. It decreases over energy. You're quicker, you're shorter, you're less healthy, you feel less vibrant, your brain functions, you're in negative energy, negative emotional energy more often than you're in that positive stuff. It's harder to feel positive. It's harder to feel curious, confident, generous, connected with people.
So for those leaders listening, how might their issue with energy impact the team around them?
Well, energy, first of all, is contagious. So if you walk in a room and your leader, your boss, your team leader, your VP, your president, your CEO is upset, pissed off, short with you, not observant, not creative, not listening, we chalk that up to a personality trait. And sometimes it is. But what I wonder is how often is it a function of a lack of energy? Like, who wants to feel crappy and no connection with the people that they lead? Nobody I've ever met, and I've worked with leaders for 10 years. Nobody wants to feel crappy. Nobody wants to feel bad. Nobody wants to do a bad job. Nobody wants the people around them to think they're doing a bad job. But when you're in the hole energetically, then all that stuff in the better parts of your brain, those become unavailable because you get so stuck in that survival piece. So you'll know it because you're not as happy. And I hesitate to use the word happy because that's another word that corporate culture has like hijacked and monetized.
Wait a minute. Don't tell me we're not allowed to be happy now. I'm
No,
just
no,
getting over the
no, no.
resilient thing. Don't mess me up that bad.
So, Mike, you're going to need resilience. Like some of the stories you told in your TEDx talk about your son, some of those moments were moments where you for sure needed to be resilient to be able to make things happen. And the story you tell so beautifully in your talk is a prime example of the proper use of resilience and displayed your resiliency for sure. But happiness is awesome. I love happiness. But happiness is like an emotion, and emotions are byproduct of something. It's very hard to go into something and say, I'm going to be happy today, especially if you feel tired or you're depleted or you're grieving, or you're confused or you're wondering or you're unsure or there's some variability going on and questions and all those things. Happiness is not, I don't consider it a pillar to rest your performance or grade your life upon. I love being happy. I search for happiness all the time in my life. And when I can't feel it, I have my go tos. I live on a farm and I have animals, and I can always find happiness with that. But it's really about, are you performing? Can you function at a level that you actually deserve to be functioning at? And most of the people that I work with, and I would bet a lot of the people that you work with say no. And they don't really realize it, because our culture is like the fishbowl we swim in is just keep going, tough it out, suck it up.
So if resilience isn't the answer, if it's not about, I just need that one more cup of coffee. And it's important to note it's not about that because it impacts your own well-being. But as you said, as a leader, it's going to impact those folks around you as well. And that
For sure.
includes your family, right? I'm not just talking business,
Yeah.
the people around you. A-
100%.
And it's so easy to say, but I'm doing this for them. I'm having this fourth cup of coffee so I can stay up and get stuff done for them, but you're actually hurting them. So, what is the right answer? If it's not about resilience, what do we need to think about and I've heard you use the terms like spending energy and recovering energy. Talk about that and
Yeah.
how we could use that as a basis for doing a better job of managing our energy.
Yeah, the problem with it is that it's so simple that people don't believe that it works. It's one of those things. I always do this. I talk about an oscillatory sine wave, right? And it gets a little mesmerizing, right? And you wanna think about spending energy, recovering energy, spending energy, recovering energy, spending energy, recovering energy, right? Like, you stress yourself out, but then you recover from it. You spend energy, you restore it. You put energy out and you replenish it. And the cool thing about this spend, restore continuum is what I call it, is that it's not a one-to-one. If you spend energy for an hour, it doesn't take you an hour to restore enough energy to get you back into a high performing state or even just a good performing state. So the way that we restore, replenish, recover our energy is really personal. However, there are some things that just work for just about everybody. So deep breathing, laughter. Which the thing about the restoration, the replenishment part about our energy is that really you want to change your chemical cocktail that's going on in your body. So when you're under stress, there's a whole bunch of hormones that the brain and body release and begin to thrive on. A couple of the major ones that we hear about are the adrenaline, the cortisol, right? And those have high cost and take a lot out of our system. When you restore, replenish, or recover energy, you move yourself over into that parasympathetic state and you change your chemicals. You change your chemicals into serotonin or dopamine, and not the addictive kind of dopamine. When you exercise, there's a couple of different types of cortisol. There's cortisol that's emergency cortisol, but when you exercise and you push yourself hard, we have good cortisol, right? So everybody has a different set of ways that they can actually replenish their energy very easily, very powerfully, and very regularly. But we don't tend to it. The biggest piece to it is the cultural piece. I did a training with a team, and they were a warehouse team for a large manufacturing company, and they monitored the warehouse. They dealt with theft, they dealt with production, they dealt with all these different things. So it was kind of a cool group, all guys, like all kind of like big security kind of personalities. And we were talking about ways to put energy back in the system. And sometimes putting energy back in the system is, sitting, doing, a crossword puzzle or playing Wordle or listening to music or having a conversation with someone or going for a walk or walking your dog or meditating or doing some light stretching or eating something or drinking something, right? I'm trying to give you like as many as I can in this moment. And this one guy was so funny because we had the initial session and then I came back a month later to check in and see how they were doing. And he said this great thing. He goes, "You have given me permission to do my push ups." And I was like, yeah, I know. I had the same face that you just had. Like, what do you mean? And he said, when I feel stressed, I usually drop down and do some push ups. When I need some creativity and I'm trying to think or work a problem out, I'll drop down and do some push ups. When I feel really good and I don't know what to do with all my energy, I'll drop down and do some push ups. And he's like, "You've given me permission to do that." And I was like, "That's awesome." Like, how cool is that? That's his jam. Nobody else on the team did that. I've never encountered anyone before or since that used push-ups as their main recovery and
Yeah, you
restoration.
think of push-ups as spending energy, not recovering. But it just goes to
Yeah.
show you, I guess, how personal it all is.
Yeah, exactly. For me, for having been an athlete and being an extrovert, for me, movement is really one of the most restorative things that I can do ever. And, there's active restoration habits and then there's inactive. And we need a blend of them. You sit at your desk and you stare at your computer, you're not very active, but you are spending energy. So it's the same way with restoring your energy. Sometimes you're moving, sometimes you're, but the key to it, the key to the replenish, restore, recover piece is that you feel relief. You feel relief from the stress, you feel relief from the spend. And if that's going for a 100-mile bike ride, then great.
For me, it's a walk. Like almost right before this, I got back about 30 minutes before I went out and took a 4-mile walk. And
There
that's
you
when I feel kind of revived if I need it. And It's also the time I come up with my best ideas.
Yeah, exactly. There's just a ton of science around what moving the body does for brain function. So, talk about this from, like an energy perspective, but underneath everything that I'm seeing, there are piles and piles and piles of science. When your energy is bad, your cognitive functioning goes down, your hormone balance decreases, which sets you up for illness, injury, and chronic problems physiologically and health wise. This is not just my good idea. Yeah, sure, it sets you up for excellence in terms of performance, but it also, like, we've got incredible health consequences when we don't take care of ourselves that way.
So when we think about this idea of spend, recover, is there a formula, right? Like I'm always trying to simplify things. If you're spending an hour at your computer working really diligently on something for every hour, like then go take a 10-minute walk or go meditate for like what is there some formula, some way we ought to think about how much time you're spending and then how much time you're recovering?
Yeah. So the body goes in 90-minute oscillatory cycles. So we're really designed for like 90-minute segments. So when I learned that, I started designing all of my keynotes, lectures, presentations, conversations, everything around this 90-minute cycle. And if you really can chunk your life into 90 minutes and work like 75 or 80 minutes, and then take 10 or 15 minutes to recover, that's incredible. So I'll also tell people start with, 1, 2, 3 minutes every 60 minutes. Set an alarm on your watch or your phone to beep every hour. Remember when we had those old Casio watches that had the
Yeah.
hourly chat? Right? When I started at HPI, we had iPhones, but we didn't have Apple Watches. And so I was still wearing my running watch or my Casio watch. And so I just set it to chime every hour. Unless I was presenting, of course. But every time it went off, I would stop. And if I had 5 minutes, I'd do something that was restorative for 5 minutes. If I had 1 minute, I'd breathe. If I had 3 minutes, I'd meditate, like anything to stop, recover, provide relief from what you were doing so that you change that chemical cocktail going on in your brain and body so that you feel better. Feeling better is what puts energy back in our tank.
So what you just made me think about is I have these full day and 2-day meetings with my clients. And
Yeah.
every hour and a half or so, which at first I'm like, "Ooh, I'm doing the right thing," but I don't think I'm doing the right
Yep.
thing. Every hour and a half or so, I'm like, "All right, we're gonna take a 10-minute break or a 15-minute break." And I even might call, "We're gonna go take a brain break." But what
Yeah.
really
Perfect.
winds up happening, well, it's not perfect because what winds up happening is what do people do? Do they really take a brain break? No, that's when they get on their email.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, first off, maybe I ought to do 80 minutes and then 10 minutes and not 90 to get that full 90-minute chunk. But there's probably some things I should do to make sure they are truly taking a brain break and maybe give them a longer break. Take 5 minutes and do email, and then I want you to take 10 minutes and go take a walk, like something where they're resting their minds. And then it's no wonder by the end of day two, nobody can think anymore because they're not
Right.
really
Yeah.
recovering the
If
way
you
they should.
and if they've got something pressing that they're looking for and they're waiting for the next break to be able to check in with that pressing issue, then that's even more costly energetically. So that's a brilliant idea, like we have this weird thing that if we take too much time to rest, we're missing out, we're lazy, or someone else is getting ahead of us. I remember the first competitive cyclist I worked with, and cyclists have this culture like they train, right? They train and they train really hard. And they have this very competitive culture that if they're not in the seat, if they're not in the saddle, the bike saddle, someone else is. And so they have this terror around taking days off and having physiological recovery. And that's something that's really hard for us mentally, emotionally, and even physically in the business world is, if I take a break and I rest, someone else is going to get ahead. But if you're not taking breaks and you're working slow and your slow work is not very creative and you don't feel very good about it, and it takes you an hour or it takes you 3 hours to do something that could take you an hour or an hour and a half, then where are you really?
Right. Yeah, so it's not
Hello.
about how long or hard you're working, it's about the results you get, and you're not gonna get those
Exactly.
results if you're not thinking straight. So, diving down and getting super pragmatic, I imagine someone listening to this saying, "This all conceptually makes sense, but I'm working my ass off and I'm trying my best. I've got a lot to do." Like, for that person, what's their first step? Because the concept is great, and you threw out some
Yeah.
very specific things people could do to recover their energy. But how should we be thinking about this in terms of, okay, starting tomorrow, I will start doing this? What's something very specific someone could do?
Well, they could set a couple of alarms across the day. Like, you have to put it in time. You can't rely on your mind to remember to give you a break if you've not been taking breaks. Because it'll be 2 o'clock and you'll be like, I was supposed to take a break at 10. That happens all the time. So I'm a huge fan of looking at your calendar. Like, I look at my calendar the night before and then in the morning, and I schedule my energy into my time. So I used to do back to back to back meetings. I don't anymore. Right. Even when like, I have a small clinical practice and then I do executive coaching and then I have my job at UF. And I'm in control of my schedule because you know what? I'm grown up. And so I look at my schedule and I think, okay, how heavy duty is my day? And what kind of energy do I need for each of those moments, each of those calendar points in my day? And if you start to look at it by how much energy do you need for that, then sometimes that takes a little bit of the wonder and the variability about how much recovery, how much restoration do I need to get. If you think you're putting out 10 ounces of energy, you want to put back in 10 ounces of energy, or you want to put back in 7 or 8 across the day so that by the time you get home, you can catch up a little bit on some of those ounces that you missed, but you also have something left for when you get home. Because what is the point in working if you get home and you have 0 left in the tank when you walk in the door, even if you live alone? I have plenty of people that I work with that live alone. And when you get home and you live alone and you have no energy, guess what you don't do? You don't eat well. You don't rest well. You're like, the way you take care of yourself, it's so hard to cook for one, dinner for one. It's really challenging. And when people are already exhausted, I find those people fail the most.
It's a vicious cycle, right? It just keeps getting worse. Wow.
Exactly. So you want to put pieces in during the day. And here's the thing, that energy has a cumulative effect. So you did not become exhausted or burned out overnight, and you will not become recovered or restored overnight. But if you start to mix up some of the balance and look for a little more replenishment here, like, I'm going to make sure I take a walk, depending on the weather. I'm going to make sure I listen to a song that I like. I'm going to make sure I call someone who makes me feel good. I'm going to go and be super introverted and play Wordle or whatever it is and just go into my head and not let anyone talk. I'm going to wear my headphones so that people will think that I'm busy and they'll leave me alone. Whatever it is, like, whatever helps you get that relief, those few minutes of relief and those good chemicals, that's what you need to do. And you need to schedule it.
I love that, and it seems like such an easy thing to do that I know I'm not doing, especially with you got these calendar apps now, like, "Oh, check my Calendly," and then I go from having nothing to do in a day to back meetings. But it would seem like such an easy thing to do to say, "Hey, instead of automatically scheduling the hour-long meeting or the 45-minute meeting, instead of an hour-long meeting, make it a 50-minute meeting. I promise you'll get
Yeah,
probably as much done, but now at the very least, you got 10 minutes before your
yeah,
next one to go take a walk or do Wordle or whatever. Or instead of a 45-minute meeting, make it a 40-minute meeting. Like, it seems so easy
yeah.
to shave off that time, and that's more time for us to recover throughout the
Yeah.
day. I love that.
Yeah, and, don't open up every hour on your calendar. When you post your Calendly, don't open up every hour. Do, like, do 50 minutes in a row and then leave a half an hour. If people can meet with you at 4 o'clock, they can meet with you at 4:30 or 3:30. You know what I mean? Like, it's really doable. We fall prey to our thinking about how it's supposed to go. And remember, it's cumulative. So the better you get at restoring your energy, the better you get at it. And the quicker you can do it, like I can recover pretty quickly now. I can have something like happen and need a break and need to recover from it and not have a long time. And I've trained my mind and body that a walk to the bathroom is restorative. Like when I go to the bathroom, it is all restore. Sometimes I'm counting my steps. Sometimes I'm feeling the way that my foot hits the ground. Sometimes I'm looking for beauty as I walk, breathing. Like I restore on the way there and on the way back. And I use that, like I always tell people if you're in like a heavy duty business situation, nobody is ever going to keep you from going to the bathroom. Now, you can't go every 5 minutes, but it's like a lifeline. Like you need to recover. Something happens that disrupts you and you need to get your bearings back. Nobody's ever going to keep you from going to the bathroom. But you got to train that muscle. I am a big fan of breathing and I love box breathing, which so many people have heard of. But you have to train it. The example I give is we walk all day. But if I said to you, Mike, you walk 4 miles every day and you walk around all day, could you walk a marathon tomorrow? No, no way. You walk all the time, but you don't train your walk for that type of performance. So you want your breath to be there for you, train it when you're not under total stress. So do box breathing every hour when you're relaxed or moderately relaxed. And we don't take the time to do it, which is so silly. We're just so silly that way.
Well, I also think it's looked at almost as a badge of honor to be incredibly busy. Like, "Oh my god,
It
I had
is.
back-to-back meetings." They like, you're gonna say that, and you almost talk yourself into being busier than you really are sometimes. But I think we've gotta get rid of that badge of honor of, "Oh,
Yeah,
look at
and
me,
that's
how busy I
that's
am."
Yeah, and that's the culture piece. And, Mike, we're lucky we work with the executives, typically the people who get to determine how some of that culture plays out. And if we can convince them to change their behavior, I say character is what trickles down. Very little else does. But character and behavior is what trickles down, Do as I say, not as I do is just crap.
Yeah,
And
if a CEO is emailing people at 11 p.m., then people start
yeah,
thinking that's expected of them too, and that's what cascades down. I love that. So,
exactly.
as we kind of wind on down, other than your work with the University of Florida, tell us a little bit about how you work with clients, whether it's individuals or businesses. How do you work with clients? What does that look like?
When I decided to take the job at UF, it was because I was looking for something a little more meaningful. Like I kept doing work in the corporate world, like a lifetime of one night stands, So I actually love to engage with people and feel that connection. And some of the teams I've been lucky, some of the teams I've worked with over the years, I've had a handful of great clients that I've worked with on, over a course of a couple of years, which has been brilliant, and that's the part that I absolutely love. Do I love getting up there and doing keynotes? Yeah, absolutely. Do I still do some? Absolutely. I enjoy the one-on-one coaching piece, and so I have like a handful of slots that I keep, and honestly, like I have a wait list for it, so I feel pretty lucky and blessed. So I'll work with people one on one, which I absolutely love. And I work a little differently, because number one, I'm a psychologist. And number two, I come from a sport plus corporate background. So I love to engage in that one on one process. And then I have my work at UF with the MBA students, which I'm new there. I've only been there for a few months. So just still kind of getting my bearing, figuring things out there.
Well, it's a beautiful campus. I know when we did our TEDx, I was in a hotel right across the street, and people thought I was nuts because I was walking the campus. For one day, I walked about 10 miles, just muttering my speech under my breath. So
I remember
people,
you telling us about that.
I
Yeah.
thought that was pretty funny.
I did that one day too when I was at work and I was like, I really need to practice my talk. So I took my phone and my phone was off. I took my phone and I held it up here and I pretended like I was talking on the phone, walked into
Exactly.
my
I'm not
talk.
a lunatic. I'm talking to somebody else. And this will all be in the show notes. But if someone wants to find out more about you and the work you do, where should they go?
drjenny.com. Super easy.
Easy.
drjenny.com. Yeah, it's really easy.
Excellent. Well, hey, this was great. So useful. And thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I really enjoyed this. You and I didn't really get too much time to engage because everything was so busy during our TEDx experience. So I really enjoyed it.
We were in the green room trying to recover before going out and spending energy. In fact, I'll say one thing I remember, and then I thought we were going to end, but this one thing, when we were in the green room, and you're trying to just relax and kind of get ready. And there was a conversation that started that was some kind of heavy conversation about, I don't remember if it was political or whatever it was. And I remember you saying, like, hey, if you're going to have this conversation, appreciate it if you did it over there quietly or did it somewhere else. But now it's like, yeah, because that was recovery time. And man, while they were doing that wasn't very relaxing. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I remember that moment. Yeah, that was definitely I was nervous to do it, but we really just needed to protect our energy in that moment.
Absolutely. Excellent. Well, now we're really signing off. Thanks again.
Now we're really signing off.
Bye bye.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike.